All right, guys. Well, good evening, and thanks for signing in again. I think we've probably got a couple more of these as we move into the season. And today for me, I guess, is really looking at kind of what I saw over the weekend in Bratislava, and trying to make sense of that and understand what we can do as players and what we can do as teams to try and use those experiences and use what we learned from there to progress and improve as players. So I'm going to share my screen. Obviously, Vojta is going again to do some translation and also add some of his experiences in where necessary. And I'll just share. And I just need you guys to make sure everything's all right there. You can see what I've got up on the screen.
Fine. Perfect.
So, guys, I guess from my perspective, first of all, it was amazing to finally put faces to names and see you guys train and see you guys compete as well. And there's so many really, really impressive things going on with what you're doing, the culture, the community out there. And, you know, it made me so excited about spending more time with you. And, you know, ultimately, you know, we've got a group here of extremely committed, dedicated and talented golfers. And, you know, it's a great opportunity, I think, to work and develop as players over the coming year. But a huge thank you to everyone that I met, and you know, from my personal experience, it was just an awesome 3 weeks, and can't wait to come back again in a couple of weeks' time to get going. But obviously, I was at Bratislava as one of probably the only coach there over the 3 days, and I thought today would be a good opportunity to go through my sort of general observations from what I saw. And I think the important thing here is that they are absolutely general observations. You know, the amount of players that I saw and the amount of holes that I got to watch of each player made it very, very difficult to have real insights into anyone's game specifically. But what it did do is allow me to have some really good ideas about, as a group, kind of where we were. So for me, the big things and the big factors here that I saw is really how we're managing our expectations on the golf course, which we've touched on in a previous talk. How we control our ball flight on the golf course and how we make our decisions, which were big things that stood out for me. And then also a little bit on the pressure that, again, my perception that you guys are placing on yourself and in your training leading up to these big events. And I kind of just want to finish with a little bit of how you can use the stats on Bryson to review your own performance, and how you can go to your coaches and look to get support from them based on that, and what you can do to kind of follow that up. So the first thing for me is really that any competition or any round that you play, regardless of your score, offers such a good opportunity to reflect on your performance, to review what you've done, and to look to ways to improve. And I think what tends to happen is, depending on how we perform, will massively influence how much we look back at what we've done. Okay, so if I take a PGA Tour golfer, for example, if you think about their 4 rounds that they're playing from Thursday to Sunday, the pro-am that they play on a Wednesday, and then the maybe the practice round they do on a Tuesday, they spend so much time on the golf course. And I think if we don't believe that time spent on the golf course is practice as well as competition, we're really missing a huge opportunity to improve. And I've mentioned this before, but we need to make sure we are effectively reviewing what we've done, because actually the amount of time we spend on the golf course is going to be greater or equal to the amount of time we're practicing or spending on a driving range or putting green outside of that. So a key thing for me here is that we don't just disregard the competition when we're done and then go and practice whatever we want. We use that competition to understand what we can improve. Okay, and there's a few ways that we can do this. I think obviously we've got the Bryson numbers that you input into your rounds. So these objective numbers for me give a huge insight into actually what has cost us shots and what has prevented us or helped us to score in the way that we have. And then other ways that we can reflect is obviously our thoughts and our feelings on our performance. But so often those thoughts and those feelings don't necessarily align with numbers. So it's about trying to match those two together, understanding why did I feel this was good and this was bad, and actually was this the case on the golf course? And for me, when we're reflecting on the performance, I think it's great as just a benchmark thing to do when you come off the golf course. Very simply, what went well and even better if. So what did I do great in that round? And what do the numbers say? And what could have been better? And what do I need to do to ensure that's going to be better for next time? And all of these things provide us with an opportunity for action. And whether that's an opportunity for action straight after our round when we head to the practice area, or if it's an opportunity for action over the next 2-3 weeks leading up to the next event, I think we have to be using what's happened on the golf course to influence our practice, and not just saying, I've played terribly and I'm going to move on, or I've played really well, so I don't need to worry about it. It's a great chance to say specifically, what have I done and where can I improve? So using those sort of 4 or 5 things there on the screen, I really urge you guys to be trying to go through those processes after each round and make that practice really impactful. Okay. So my general observations from Braslav is, the first one, and like I've mentioned, is I couldn't have been kind of prouder of everyone in terms of their commitment to wanting to be doing well, how they went about their business in terms of managing themselves on the golf course, and a real hunger and desire to succeed. And the second thing that I think was amazing and far better than I could have anticipated across the whole spectrum of players playing was just how good the ball striking was across the group. It really is fantastic, and I think it needs to be on the length of courses that we're playing and where we're trying to go to. But I feel that the ball striking is a real strong point of the federation players and players that are part of this program and wanting to do well. And when I look through kind of what was the big things that I observed, I suppose, was the first one is just how tough the setup on that first day was. Okay, so we think of things like the pin positions, the wind, the length of the golf course, the condition of the greens possibly as well. But on that day one, for me, far too many players played themselves out of that tournament. And I think a really key thing for you guys to think about is the fact that you can't win a golf tournament on the first day, but you can definitely lose it. And for me, that was the big thing across the board, was that actually too many players played themselves out of contention of being able to compete. And we'll come on to a little bit more of that in a minute. And the next one, I suppose, is something that may or may not have been an issue, but I would like to see more. So really clear definitions from you guys, whether that's to yourself, your coach, to me, to anyone in the federation coaching setup. What is going to make this competition a success to you? And what can you control that's not linked just to the scoring? Because for me, far too much of what I saw was linked just to scoring related to par and not thinking about other areas around that. What do you need to do to control that? So for me, I would love to see more on Bryson before we go out and compete is, okay, right, this is what's going to be a great week for me. This is what this tournament's going to be great to look like. Okay, so that's something I'd like to see posted more. And then just as good as the ball striking was, I think there were generally some really poor or bad decisions made around the shots that we were trying to play. Okay, so for example, too many shots missed on the short side of greens with short irons, too many balls in position Z or bad positions or hazards off the tee. That's really started to cost us shots. Okay. And then generally ball flight control, especially with the short irons into greens. Okay, when it was windy, when it was tough, how we were controlling that ball flight. And I think this is one of the biggest ones for me, was the disgust, the absolute disgust on people's faces when they were hitting shots that weren't perfect. They weren't in position A, but they were still in play with an opportunity to reach the green or an opportunity to putt still for a birdie, even if it was from a bit of a longer way back. And I think this is something that we've got to get into our head and into our mentality, that winning, or the ability to win with our C game, is so, so important. Okay, we don't have to strike the ball perfectly every time we hit a golf shot to be able to score. So an example of that, and I won't name names, was down the 5th hole at Braslav, where you've got the whole world to the left and then the trees and the path to the right. And I've seen a couple of drivers being hit a long way left, but still having a great opportunity to then get to the green in 2. But players are losing their control of their emotions because of how they've hit the shot or where it's ended up in relation to the fairway, and not figured the fact that actually, yes, it hasn't been my best shot, but I've still got a good opportunity here. Okay, so I think Rory McIlroy says that he hits about 3 shots around that he's genuinely pleased with how he struck that golf ball and how that flight has come off. So we have to accept that we can't hit the middle of the club face every time. We can't put the perfect swing on it, but we need to be able to win with our C game. Okay, and we can't go 3-4 round tournaments without having a stretch of shots where we're not hitting it great. And the more we can understand and accept that, the better we are going to play. Okay. And then, again, maybe specific to some of you and not to others, but just the amount of pressure placed on yourself to play your best golf in that first round or that first tournament of the season. And we need to understand that this is a journey that we're going on. Okay. We are not the complete players yet. We are not where we want to be. And actually, yes, it might be disappointing if we don't have a great tournament and really good if we do, but this is just a stepping stone to where we want to get to, okay? And we need to trust ourselves in the processes that we're going through with our training to understand that we're putting in the work and we don't need to change it too much to then get the results that we want to get, but they're not always going to happen. And we don't just see the amount of training equaling best performances. So I would say give yourselves a break and go out there and play knowing that you've put the work in. I think if you feel you haven't put the effort in practice, then it's slightly more acceptable to be putting that pressure on yourself or being frustrated. But if you're sticking to your program, sticking to your training, then let what happens on the golf course happen, review, reflect, and improve and move on. But there's so many things that you can't control. So don't put too much pressure on yourself in every moment to play golf. And then finally, from an observation point of view, as I've already alluded to, I just think it's a really amazing group of golfers. And I'm really proud and feel privileged to be able to get to work with you guys. And I think the potential there is huge. So no matter how the performance was last weekend, I think you should take the positives from it because there's an enormous amount of growth there and a really exciting opportunity. So Vojtou, I don't know if you want to jump in with a little bit of translation there before I continue.
Yeah, definitely.
We'll keep it brief and quick.
Yeah. Dobrý večer. Já vás také vítám. Vítáme vás u třetího workshopu s Harrym, přičemž Harry se snažil zrekapitulovat, co viděl na Zbraslavi při první ČGF Amateur Tour a snažil se, nebo se snaží nastínit, co můžete udělat jako hráči, co můžete zlepšit a pokusit se zlepšit v repre skupinách. A přičemž v prvním slajdu jako takovém se dostal k tomu review, nebo respektive tomu zrekapitulování, co viděl na Zbraslavě jako takové. A v první řadě to byla skvělá příležitost pro něj poznat hráče, které pozná, tím za to je strašně rád. A na druhou stranu během těch 2-3 jamek, co chodil s těmi flighty, pro něj bylo strašně těžké definovat, jakou máte hru, nebo respektive jak hrajete vy jako hráči, jako takový. Potom se snažil taky pozorovat, jak se chováte, jakou máte strategii na hřiště a jaké typy ran hrajete, jaké máte rozhodování a v neposlední řadě, jaký tlak na sebe vyvíjíte v průběhu těch kol jako takových a tak. Přičemž v průběhu, nebo respektive jakákoliv soutěž, jakýkoliv turnaj nebo turnajové kolo, nehledě na skóre, nabízí skvělou příležitost pro zpětnou vazbu sami sebe, jak jste hráli, co jste udělali dobře, co jste udělali špatně. A například turoví hráči na jakýkoliv túře, kteří hrají turnaj od čtvrtka do neděle, tak mají od pondělí do středy čas trénovat, seznámit se s tím hřištěm a během toho času stráví spoustu těchto chvil právě na tom hřišti, aby to hřiště poznali a berou ten trénink ve finále stejně důležitě jako tu soutěž samotnou. Přičemž, jak hrají ten týden co týden, tak díky tomu, jak hráli ten poslední turnaj, tak mají ve finále 3 dny na to, aby dokázali uspůsobit a zreviovat, nebo respektive vyhodnotit tu svoji hru a potenciálně se zlepšit do těch následujících týdnů, měsíců, těch dalších turnajů. A vlastní zpětná vazba je strašně důležitá a je strašně důležitý to dělat efektivně. Nedohrajete hřiště a neřeknete si jenom, jo, hrál jsem dobře, nemusím víceméně jako co moc trénovat. Na druhou stranu, tady je taky špatně si říct, hele, hrál jsem strašně špatně a tak. Ne, musíte to dělat efektivně. To znamená, že přijdete a jasně, uděláte si statistiky, můžete si do těch statistik taky napsat, jak jste se cítili, jak jste pracovali s vašimi emocemi a díky tomu, že si to správně vyhodnotíte a i podle těch statistik, těch pevných dat a těch čísel to vidíte, tak díky tomu můžete uspůsobit další trénink a můžete ho dělat efektivně a efektivně se taky zlepšovat. Že to v úvozovkách nebude na náhodu. Přičemž Harry taky zmínil, co tam viděl, co pozoroval a měl tam pár bodů. Za prvý se mu strašně líbilo, jakou jste měli všichni chuť, které viděl, jak jste hráli, jak jste do toho dávali všechno. Viděl velmi dobrý ball striking, to, jak jste trefovali míč. A také v prvním kole zmínil, že byly velmi těžké podmínky. A spoustu těch hráčů v těch těžkých podmínkách se vyautovalo z turnaje. Přičemž v tom prvním dni jako takovým, ten turnaj s menší pravděpodobností nevyhrajete, ale můžete ho velmi jednoduše prohrát a to se právě viděl podle výsledků hry, protože byl jako jediný trenér na Zbraslavi, tak viděl, že spousta hráčů se zbytečně odpálilo rovnou v tom prvním kole. Protože, tak jedna z variant, protože jste měli třeba velké nároky na sebe a strašně se třeba chtěli tlačit na pilu, přičemž ta přemotivovanost, která byla vidět u některých hráčů, když je třeba viděl po 12 jamkách a hráli +3 a tvářili se, jako kdyby hráli 90, tak to asi není úplně OK, protože v těch podmínkách, jak jí panovaly, respektive skoro všechny ty 3 dny, a +3 bylo velmi dobré. Jo, to velmi dobrá hra a tak říkat, když jste hráli v paru, tak se to rovnalo, jako kdybyste byli skoro turoví hráči. Co taky ale viděl, tak špatné vyhodnocování, ať už té kontroly vašeho letu míče, špatné vyhodnocování run, jak je zahrát, výběr holí do greenu, většinou se to trefovali, nebo viděl spoustu run zkažených na špatné strany. Když jste minuli green, tak jste to měli potom na krátký pin, takže jste si museli přihrávat s velmi obtížnou ránu, nebo respektive ta další rána byla velmi obtížná, nějaký vysoký pitch a tak dále. A nebo jste zase naopak trošku laborovali s těma kratšíma železama, respektive, že jste si vybírali třeba proti větru kratšího, než by bylo zdrávo proti tomu větru a že jste se s tím úplně nedokázali vypořádat. Taky spousta hráčů nechtělo akceptovat rány, které se vám nepovedly na 100%, ale byly pořád ve hře, protože je spousta hráčů nastavených jenom na to, aby se zahráli 100% rány. Ale na druhou stranu nutno podotknout, že Harry tam dává příklad Roryho McIlroye, že je údajně spokojen se 3-4 ránama na kolo. Momentálně si myslím, že Rory není spokojen ani s jednou, protože netrefí vrata od stodoly, ale nezáleží na tom, jak dobrý jsou vaše dobrý rány, ale jak špatný jsou ty špatný rány. Abyste se pořád drželi ve hře, protože je naprosto zbytečný ztrácet rány různýma trestnejma. Například, že trefíte vodu, nebo auty, nebo se dostáváte do pozic, ze kterých už nemůžete nic vymyslet. A tak dále. Spoustu z vás si taky na sebe dává díky tomu strašný tlak, už třeba před prvním týčkem, a díky tomu potom v tom prvním kole můžete zbytečně vybouchnout. A taky ale Harry viděl spoustu hráčů, nebo všechny, kteří mají obrovský potenciál, a to se mu strašně líbilo. Takže to jenom takhle na začátek, co Harry pozoroval, co viděl. A teďka už mu přenechám slovo. Harry, you can go to go.
Thanks, Vojtou. Brilliant. So, guys, I think the first one was a big part of our discussion a couple of weeks ago in the presentation, but managing of expectations. This was something that was huge for me, is what was a good score on that first day? And how many of you really considered this before or during the round? So given the setup, the pins, I don't know, I thought they were interesting pin positions. I thought the conditions were tough with the wind. And I think of holes like that third hole, the par 3, that was, you know, for a lot of you guys out there, it's kind of long irons into a green that for me should be approached with like a 9 or an 8 iron. So how many in position opportunities were there? How many opportunities were there for birdie putts? And where were the pins, and just how much had the wind affected the ball? And then, as we've all talked about, I think, is the not necessarily bad conditions of the greens, but they were slow. And how those affected what was going to be a good score. Or were we just thinking about par as a score without thinking about all of those things? And my observations, again, is I watched some of the very good players at what I thought were decent scores through 9 through 12 holes, maybe kind of 3 over. And the looks I was getting and the attitudes of the players at this point looked like they weren't going to break 90 at that point. Okay, so for me, level par on that day, and I feel like I saw this fairly early on in the day, was an exceptional score. And to be honest, we've got, I think Vasek is on the call, who won the event, is the men's top ranked player at this point, shooting level par. So for me, that is a pretty exceptional score. And we need to align those expectations correctly, because actually, when we are going 3 over and thinking this is terrible, then this has a huge negative impact on the scoring, because we start to think that we are falling behind. And we start trying to chase birdies and stop sticking to the strategy that we've selected. And we end up with our emotions controlling the situation, and we start going at too many pins that aren't accessible, and we stop thinking about what is realistic and what is a sensible and smart play, and think, right, I need to get back into this game and start getting too aggressive. And that leads to the bogeys and the double bogeys. And that, for me, is where people started playing themselves out of the tournaments, okay, very early on. So important. Again, if you missed it, I would go and have a look at this again, but just identifying what is going to be a good score. So looking at the scorecard, how many in position opportunities have I got? How many chances within 6 meters have I going to have to give myself realistic birdie opportunities? And then looking at the course, like certainly for some of the players in the RTS programs and the younger players, then, you know, there's some really long holes where if you're walking away with par, it's a great score on that hole. Then you add in the pin positions, and then the things like we've said about the condition of the greens, and suddenly what we maybe had initially said was a good score is now an absolutely great score. So the more we can get used to that process and go through, right, where are my in position opportunities? Is there anything on the course planner that's going to stop that? Now, where are the flags, and can I still go for them? And then what are the conditions of the day, the wind and the surfaces that might affect that? And I think, you know, probably as a group, players were 3 or 4 shots worse off purely because of these things, that they didn't manage their expectations well enough, and as such started doing things that were against maybe how they had initially planned to go out and play. So that process is so, so important for me, and something that I will continue to kind of really drive home until we're getting that right. And then the big things for me, from what I saw, where improvements could be made. So generally speaking, the short iron approaches and the wedge control is, I don't have huge explanations as what I think you should do. I think it's a case of, right, we need to go out there and continue to work on these areas. Where we can start getting inside 6 meters, we've got to get so good at that. And that is practicing to targets, practicing away from the targets a little bit, moving it away from pins, but also controlling that ball flight. So when it started to get windy, when the wind was coming in the face, I think that for relatively short shots, we still need to be in good control of those clubs. And for me, I think that comes back to a lot about the speed that we're putting into those swings. We know that the more speed that we add into that golf swing, the more spin we're getting, the higher that ball flight is going to be into winged. So we don't need to spend a lot of time working on developing really good punch shots and shots below the wind. Just taking a bit of speed off the shots, taking extra clubs, and being able to control that proximity with those short approaches, because there were still scoring opportunities out there. I really believe that there were still scoring opportunities out there coming in with short clubs, but the fact that there was a struggle to control that ball flight in the wind because we were going too big on them, for me, let us down a little bit. And then the two things that we've mentioned, the pin positions and understanding those dispersion patterns. So this, for me, is a really important aspect. And I don't want you guys to feel that I'm ever suggesting we need to be defensive with our play. And I totally don't agree with that. I think we need to be aggressive as we can be off the tee. We have to hit the ball a long way. We've got to give ourselves shorter shots into greens, but we've got to be smart with that. And we really need to understand that we play within a dispersion pattern and not just our best shot. And this is not to say that when we don't have our chosen shot, we shouldn't be 100% committed to being positive and aggressive with our swing thoughts. But we know that within our swing, we've got things like how we're aiming, how we strike the ball, is going to play any golf shot within a certain dispersion pattern. Okay, if you look at PGA Tour players, their dispersion with a driver is about 50 yards, so 40-ish meters between left and right. And the key question for me is, do we accept this shot pattern and understand it and build it into our play, or do we just go out there when we tee up and think that we're going to hit our perfect shot? And if we have a look at this hole, I think it was 13, like, I've seen so many golf balls compared to, like, percentage wise, so many golf balls in that water over the 3 days. And anyone that hit the ball in the water can tell me why they did it. But for me, it's like we're thinking about the perfect shot. We're thinking, right, if I hit the ball the best I can, this is roughly where it's going to land. Okay, so we've got that dispersion or that shot there that we want to hit. And maybe that line is a bit too far right, but as an example, okay, actually realistically, that is more of the pattern that we're going to hit with the driver. Yes, we could hit it perfectly straight down the middle, but we also could be pushing it a little bit further right of our aim point and end up in the drink. And when I spoke to players about this, I think that the answers I got back were, oh, I wasn't aiming in the right place, or I pushed it. And of course, I think they're both good answers, but that doesn't mean that we don't play within shot pattern, because we are going to push some drives. We are going to not strike the ball perfectly. Okay, so we've got one perfect shot. We've got then realistic dispersion on that line. And then if I shift that over, we've got actually, what does that dispersion look like if I remove the water completely out of play? And then we start asking questions, is driver still the correct choice in that situation? Okay. So for me, that shouldn't take away the fact that when we do pick our spot, we want to be super focused on that. We want to take our line and commit 100% and go through our routine and be positive. But we have to understand that we play within a shot pattern, okay? And we need to work to understand this shot pattern on the driving range, on the course when we're practicing, and what that looks like with different clubs and how it influences our decisions. And I've used a driver as an example there, but obviously it comes into play with short irons as well, or approach shots. Okay, so that would be a big thing for me. The second one would be, you know, where is the wind, okay, and where is the pin? So I think one thing we need to be really conscious of is that we're always trying to negotiate between gaining a birdie and then avoiding a bogey. And this isn't necessarily aggressive or defensive, but on day two, I think it was day two, the wind was quite strongly off the right, pin was back left, and I'm thinking, well, actually, is there that much advantage going with the driver? Is it an accessible pin? Is it reachable in two? And is it a better option to lay up, you know, around that 200 meter mark rather than taking on the driver and potentially laying up into that kind of gray area there? And I'm not saying, you know, there's a right or wrong, because it is going to be individual and specific to you guys. But I think these are the sort of things we need to be really considering when we're playing. Thinking about the wind, thinking about the pin position when we're back on the tee, and what is going to give us the best opportunity of birdie, but reduce the opportunity of a bogey. So I saw a lot of plays which I think were potentially going to increase the chances of making a birdie, but also bringing in a greater risk of making a bogey. So they're things to absolutely consider. And again, with the iron approaches, just thinking about what that dispersion pattern looks like, depending on the club that we're coming in with. So if the flag is in the middle of the green there, yeah, for sure, take dead aim and go straight at it. But understand what your shot pattern looks like and work in practice at developing that. Because as soon as I move that pin position over to that right-hand side there, suddenly, if I'm taking aim at the pin, then I'm bringing a lot more of that roll out and down the slope into play, okay? So for me, this is something that can be really developed in practice. Be realistic in practice. Don't just dismiss the wide shots you hit and think that, oh, I can do better. I can do better. Actually use that crosshair to identify where your misses are and accept that that will be the same when you compete. Don't just search in practice for that perfect shot. Accept that you hit the ball within a shot pattern. And as you get better, we're reducing that shot pattern, that dispersion. So for me, keep working on the practice range of understanding what that looks like with each club, and then really think about that when you're competing, when you're picking a spot on from the tee or into a green. And sometimes, yeah, that brings the rough into play, but that's okay, providing it's taking out maybe the water or the hazard completely on the other side of the green.
Okay, Harry, up to me?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yep. Tak, druhá část dnešního webináře. A jak dokážete, nebo jak jste dokázali se vyrovnat s vašimi očekáváním a před hrou a během těch kol jako takových? Co bylo na Zbraslavi dobré skóre během prvního dne? A kolik z vás si tohle dokázalo zrealizovat, ať už v průběhu kola nebo před tím kolem jako takovým. A kolik z vás taky se dokázalo realisticky podívat na to, jaké jsou podmínky a díky tomu, jak jsme se už zmiňovali s Harrym v tom druhém workshopu, kolik z vás si díky tomu, jak foukal vítr, jaké byly návrty, přičemž ty návrty těch pin pozic byly poměrně obtížné a těžké, hlavně v tom prvním kole, tak kolik z vás si realisticky vyhodnotilo, že máte kolik šancí konkrétních na birdy, na skórování, kvůli větru, kvůli návrtům a díky tomu, jak jste taky přistoupili k té hře samotné, protože najednou to potenciální skóre nebo ten váš osobní pár by měl vzrůst, přičemž to, jak zmiňoval právě Harry ještě v tom prvním i ve druhé části dnešního webináře, tak právě spousta z vás šlo třeba +3 po těch 12 jamkách, ale tvářili jste se, jako kdybyste neměli zahrát po 90, přičemž ten konkrétní první den ty podmínky byly velmi obtížné. Protože kolem paru hrát znamenalo, že byste byli, nebo že jste jedni z top hráčů v agru. Jo, konkrétně v mužích jako takových, protože ať už to bylo návrtama těch jamek, větrem a celkovou obtížností toho hřiště, to bylo velmi obtížné. Zároveň to pořád vypadá, co Harry mohl vidět, nebo měl možnost vidět, že pořád spousta z vás řeší jenom ten par té jamky jako takový. Neřeší právě ty kondice toho hřiště, když budete mít dlouhý par 420 metrů, nebo například na Zbraslavi třetí jamka, první den defoukala proti větru 200 metrů nebo 195 metrů z těch zadních odpaleš pro kluky. Velmi těžká jamka a je velká potenciální šance zahrát bogy. Takže díky tomu byste se automaticky neměli z toho v úvozovkách rozsypat, ale přijmout to, že to může nastat a díky tomu byste to hřiště nebo respektive tady tu konkrétní jamku měli víceméně projít v klidu. A pokud jste tady to neudělali, tak může dojít k velmi negativnímu dopadu na vaší psychiku, protože pokud pořád řešíte, že ten pár, ten konkrétní daný den, když byl těžký, je pořád 72, tak sami sebe dokážete dostat díky tomu pod tlak a pak, jak už zase jsme zmiňovali ten workshop předtím, budete s největší pravděpodobností rozhodovat na základě emocí a nikoliv na základě předem nadizajnovaného toho plánu, jak hrát to hřiště nebo ten konkrétní den. A díky tomu se stává velká pravděpodobnost, nebo se může stát velká pravděpodobnost toho, že budete hrát víc bogy, víc dabláčů a tak dále a tak dále. A abyste se tomuto vyvarovali, tak ještě jednou Harry zmínil to, co minule, ten takzvaný 4krokový proces, kde můžete odhalit ten skórovací potenciál váš. Je to ta scorekarta, je to cvičné kolo, nebo respektive plán toho hřiště, když už ho znáte, abyste ho věděli, jak ho hrát, pin pozice a ty dané podmínky a například větru toho konkrétního dne jako takového. Harry tam také zmínil, že jak kontrolovat ten let toho míče, tu trajektorii jako takovou a zároveň jak správně rozhodovat, nebo jaký budete mít, jak budete rozhodovat, jak hrát, tak zmínil příklad wedgie, jak je mít pod kontrolou a zároveň i krátká železa. Že třeba nemusíte úplně drillovat a hrát nějaké punche a nižší rány jako takové. Ono se stačí vzít o 1, o 2, o 3 hole víc, záleží, jaká samozřejmě bude intenzita větru a místo toho, abyste pořád hráli na 100% ty rány, tak stačí zahrát na 70, 80, 85, 90% švih. Díky tomu, že ten švih je pomalejší, rychlost hlavy hole je menší, díky tomu ten míček tolik neroztočíte, bude držet směr a zároveň ta rána jako taková, ta trajektorie bude nižší, protože když budete hrát proti větru, tak ten míček, čím má větší spin, tím potenciálně může víc nastoupat a bude to potom velmi těžké kontrolovat jak vzdálenost, tak potenciální směr toho míče. Zároveň zmínil taky layupy, pin pozice jako takové a pochopení vašich konkrétních vzorů těch rozptylů, ať už s driverem, ať už se železama, s wedgema, tak nesoustředit se na to, abyste chtěli zahrát tu ránu, která bude 100%, ale zároveň si racionálně odhadnout a vědět, jaký bude, nebo jaká je vaše disperze, ten rozptyl želez, jaký máte rány. A díky tomu, ať už ve větru nebo nikoliv, když bude víceméně bez větří, abyste věděli, co se stane, když švihnete tak vaši nějakou normální ránu, a že budete vědět, že se stane tohle, že ten green minete třeba zleva. Ale budete to vědět, tudíž už s tím můžete různě pracovat na tom hřišti. Potenciálně můžete upravovat strategii vaší hry. A to rozhodování, ten decision making je takovej, tak znamená vědět a hrát tu ránu, ten vzor toho rozptylu a nesnažit se zahrát tu 100% nejlepší ránu. On tam měl krásnou ilustraci, myslím si, že to je 13 na Zbraslavy, par 5, tak Harry tam byl druhý den, viděl spoustu ran do vody hrát stýčka, přičemž každému řeknete nebo vysvětlíte, proč se zahráli ten míč do vody, ale je to zbytečný z toho důvodu, že každý ví, proč to tam zahrál, ale jestli jste volili dobrou strategii pro tu konkrétní jamku jako takovou, jestli není zbytečný hrát driver, když byste mohli hrát například železo a zahrát to třeba, když bude foukat proti vítr, jako to bylo v druhém dnu, tak zahrát radši železo a nějaký kratší železo, jako třetí rán do greenu pod kontrolou a stejně si potenciálně můžete vytvořit šanci do verdy, do těch 6,5-7 metrů. Protože vy, nebo občas se stává, že se snažíte zahrát ránu, nebo že spočítáte s tou nejlepší ránou, přičemž zrovna na té 13 tam byla hezká ilustrace toho, že se snaží zahrát do nejúžšího krku, kde máte po pravé straně vodu, po levé straně bunkry, ale neřešíte, jaká bude ten rozptyl, nebo co se může stát, protože ty nejlepší hráči, Harry tam dával příklad, i ty nejlepší hráči třeba na PGA Tour, mají rozptyl driveru zhruba 40-45 metrů. To znamená, že oni počítají s tím, že když ho vezmou, co se stane, 20 metrů odchylka doleva, 20 metrů odchylka doprava, příkladově, tohle není samozřejmě jenom s driverem, ale i samozřejmě s kratšími železy. A dokážou s tím potenciálně podstatně líp pracovat. Jo, protože nehrajou a neřeší ten course management nebo ten management toho hřiště nebo toho turnaje, nebo respektive nepočítají s tou nejlepší ránou, ale počítají s tou průměrnou. Dobře. Chcete přijmout ne tu nejlepší ránu, ale tu průměrnou. Abyste věděli, že každý má, když hráč bude hrát fady příkladově, tak bude mít tu takzvanou nudli, já úplně nevím, jak to mám dobře popsat, tak bude mít tu disperzi nějakou. Když bude hrát naopak dročka, tak bude mít tu disperzi přesně naopak, když mine zprava, když mine zleva. Samozřejmě, když bude foukat, tak ta disperze se zvětšuje nebo respektive roztahuje ta nudle. A je důležité, abyste s tím dokázali umět, nebo abyste s tím začali dokázat umět pracovat. Protože třeba zrovna konkrétně na té 13. jamce foukalo proti, nebo respektive zprava proti a je tam otázka. Hrát agresivně, nehrát agresivně. Hry tam zmínil, že 100% má hrát agresivní hru, stýčka být co nejdelší, abyste hráli co nejkratší rány do greenu, abyste dokázali využít toho vašeho potenciálu, ale zároveň, abyste byli chytří na to, že se stane, co se stane, když to zahrajou tam. Takže se snažit přemýšlet tak, abyste hráli tu druhou ránu potenciálně z co nejlepšího úhlu, například do greenu, nebo na ten pin jako takovej. A určitě nehrát třeba defenzivně, protože z defenzivy se můžou potenciálně zase udělat další chyby, zbyteční bogy, trojpatama a tak dále. Ale všeho s mírou. Zase zpátky, ještě jak jsem zmínil, respektive jak jsem načal tu 13, když foukalo zprava proti, tak během toho druhého dne, tak otázky opravdu je důležité, nebo máte šanci zahrát tu druhou ránu na green, jestli to není lepší naopak, hrát defenzivně nebo v úvozovkách na jistotu. Co se stane, když budete hrát druhou ránu? Z nějaké pozice, co se stane, když ji budete hrát třeba kratší. Konkrétně jsme se bavili i s Harrym ještě před prezentací jako takovou a já konkrétně, když já zrovna nejsem úplně dobrý příklad, tak já nikdy nehraju driver ani trojku dřevo na té 13, protože vím, a to je spíš asi příkladově pro chlapce, kteří jsou trošku delší. Já hraju nějakou 4 železo nebo 3 železo s odpaliště, protože pokud vy budete dlouzí, tak automaticky po té levé straně jdou do hry ty bunkry, přičemž z toho bunkru už je to automaticky layup. A já v těch bunkrech za prvý nechci bejt, za druhý vím, že i když budu nějakých 220-230 metrů od jamky, tak pořád jsem úplně v klidu na to, abych zahrál tu druhou ránu na green a absolutně nejsou ve hře de facto žádný bunkry pro mě. Tak jenom taková vsuvka. A pak tam ještě zmiňoval disperzi nebo respektive rozptyl na greenu, nebo respektive co se stane, když, kam mířit, když navrtaná vpravo, vlevo, ve prostředku a co viděl, kde byla největší rozptyl těch run do greenu a spousta těch hráčů nebo vás jako takových byla hodně krátká. Jo, proti tomu větru většina tam nebyla těch 5-6 metrů a bavíme se pořád o těch nebo respektive pod těch 130 metrů, když jste hráli layupy, nebo ať už jste hráli layupy, ale většina těch run byla kratší. Na druhou stranu v tom druhém dně asi za mě bylo lepší být potom potenciálně kratší, protože ten vítr, kdyby se přestřelili green, tak vítr foukal potom byli jste na odkloněném greenu a bylo by to zase velmi těžká příhra. Na druhou stranu je být krátkej. Jakmile jste 10, 12, 13 metrů od jamky, to už je moc. A s největší pravděpodobností jste potom volili špatnou hul do greenu, anebo to byl nějaký mezit, který ale nebyl úplně OK. Ty hlavní sdělení jako takový. Snažte se být realističtí v tom trénování. Snažte se správně si vyhodnotit ty turnaje jako takové, co šlo, co nešlo, co byste mohli zlepšit, proč byste mohli zlepšit. A nebejt na sebe naštvaní, když netrefíte ránu, když to bude nějaká disperze, nějaký rozptyl, ale už vědět, že to je nějaká vaše odchylka a počítat s ní, abyste příště nebyli zase v emocích, abyste s tím byli zajedno, abyste věděli, proč se to stalo. Potenciálně to potom zase do budoucna trénovat, aby ta odchylka byla menší. A snažit se tu disperzi právě zmenšovat. A vědět, že jak jsem zmínil ty asi neúplně dobrý překlad, ty nudle vaše, ať už budete hrát fade draw, rovný rány, tak aby ty nudle byly potenciálně co nejužší. Jo, a ve finále to platí od driverů počínaje přes večky konče. To si myslím, že zatím asi všechno. Harry, up to you.
Thanks a lot. Right, last one then, guys. So I guess just to wrap up then, the final thing was really about the pressure that was only my perception, and again, only you guys know if this applies to you or not, but felt like there was a lot of pressure being placed on the outcome of this event. And I fully appreciate that it is a big event. You know, there's not many of these through the year. First big one of the season, and a long winter of COVID. So yes, it is a big event, and absolutely it means a lot to you guys. And to be honest, if that's not the case, then you probably need to ask yourself some questions if you're in it for the right reasons. However, I think one tournament does not define you as a player. And again, as I've said before, your performance on the golf course should not reflect who you are as a person. And this for me is so important, that we do not want to start to link our own self-worth with how we perform on the golf course. Okay, they are two very separate things. And I think what I saw from, and what I spoke to people about, and the conversations that I had, was it seemed for me like the amount of practice was increasing quite significantly in the couple of days before that tournament. Okay, and of course our practice is going to look different in the off season to in season, and that's absolutely fine, but we should still have a program that we are following and sticking to, regardless of when we're playing or not. Okay, so it reminds me a little bit of school, when we've got a test coming up that we know we haven't put the work in for, and we try and cram the revision just before that exam. Okay, and we need to accept that what happens on the golf course is going to be based on a number of different factors, and we can only put the practice in that we expect from ourselves in that lead up to the event. And we shouldn't be suddenly trying to find something or change something or really start to increase the workload as we come into that tournament. So you guys need to really think about, what does your training look like? How sustainable is it? Can I keep that consistent over a period of time? Yes, the content might change, but we don't want to start trying to do a lot more in the lead up to that event, because it's only going to put more pressure on us to achieve, and it's just not realistic. So again, I would really consider what your practice looks like and how you are going about designing that to fit around everything else that you do. You know, you really don't want to end up in a situation where you might see your friends once a week on a Friday, and then suddenly just before the golf tournament, right, that stops. Or you neglect your schoolwork because you've got this tournament. You need to keep everything in balance, and you need to manage the situation well. That time management is one of the greatest skills that you will have as a developing elite player, okay? Because you can't neglect the other things, but you have to make sure you're doing the right amount, and we don't want to be changing that, okay? So finally, the thing for me would be us using Bryson to review our performance. And this for me, I think, is something that I'm going to be, again, really pushing to do. And it's something you can do through a coach or through someone you trust, or just to yourself. But please make sure this is happening. Okay, so as we take Bratislava for an example, what I would tend to want to see would be to look at the last 3 rounds. So that would be the Bratislava tournament, 2 or 3 rounds, and get those up in the statistics, okay? And compare to the last maybe 10 rounds or your last season, and then identify the key scoring areas, okay? Ask yourself the hard questions. And I think being honest and open and your own biggest critic is important, providing you're staying positive about this. Okay, so what was good? What could be improved? So I've got an example here from one of the players. And again, I'm not going to name the name of this player, but for me, these are the key stats that we want. And they're on that headline page of Bryson, because we know these are the key areas for scoring. So on the right-hand side there, I've got the baseline target numbers. But if we look through this player, we've got the greens in regulation and the greens in regulation per round. So this guy or girl was hitting over 14 greens in regulation, which is excellent, which is really, really good, because we know that we're looking for 13. And then out of those greens in regulation, he was hitting nearly 70% of those within 6 meters of the hole, which is an unbelievable stat. So for me, this says right away that what is happening from tee to green is fantastic, okay? And this is the same person that did moan to me about how they were driving the golf ball. Okay, so I don't care how you're driving the golf ball if you're hitting 14 greens in regulation, nearly 70% of those were within 6 meters. The driving is not an issue that's correlating to your scoring. So the two things for me that just looking at that I identified was, right, well, how many of those putts inside 6 meters were converted? Only 24%. So that's probably half of what we want to see if we are going to be shooting decent scores, if we're going to be shooting under par. And then in terms of the scrambling, again, 27%, and we're looking for that 50%. So immediately, just looking at those headline figures, we can see there what areas have cost better scores and what areas have contributed significantly. Okay, so for me, absolutely, we need to be looking there at the putting and the scrambling. And then as I go deeper into that, okay, so we know there that actually nearly all of those chip shots, those shots around the green, were from the rough. So are we doing enough with our short game practice from those rough lies rather than the fairway? Okay. And then looking at the putting, we can see actually, well, there's 9 3 putts there, knowing that we're after a target of less than 1 per round. And I can start to dive deeper into those areas. But the important thing for me is absolutely using those 5 parameters that we've got on the screen to start identifying where that score is cost, and not just leaving it up to how we feel. And that comes a bit back to accepting that we don't always strike the ball perfectly, but we can be in good positions to then have good approaches. But those numbers on the screen there are going to be the ones that are directly correlating to how we score. So use those numbers. So filter the last 3 rounds, identify the scoring areas, and ask yourself the hard questions. So my questions now would be, okay, what was it in the putting that made you have 9 3 putts? Was it the speed of the greens that you just couldn't get used to? Is there something you can do now in your practice before you go out to compete to calibrate that speed? Is it that when we were inside that 3 to 6 meters and there's a very low percentage there, were we not giving the hole a chance? Was it a read? Was it speed? Was it start line? But actually starting to dive down into those numbers a little bit more. But don't get lost in all of the stats. This is simple stuff. These are the key things that we need to look at, and don't forget that. And go to those first, compare it to our baseline and say, right, what have we done this week? Now, the putting, for instance, could just be the greens were just not good enough and you're happy with the stroke, and that is fine as well. But you need to be reflective based on those numbers. So to finish off, guys, I think this is a task that I'm saying is a task for now, but actually should be a task for every time you finish a tournament, every time you come off a golf course. Okay, so how many greens, in positions, conversions, and scrambles did you make? Because that is going to identify where the shots were lost. And then being honest with yourself, what was great about your performance in these areas? Because there's always going to be good things, and we can make the stats look how we want, but actually we need to be realistic, but also positive about what's been good. And then what are the biggest areas that will improve scoring next time out? So we know for this player, it's going to be around the green, increasing the up and downs and the conversion of putts. So then telling yourself, right, what am I going to do to develop these areas? Is it going to be in the technical, the tactical, so the decision making, the strategy, or the mental side? And then be specific with that. Give yourself some measurable drills. Who can you turn to for support? And that could be us as coaches within the federation, your personal coaches, but use someone, show them what you've put down for the above information, and then use that to help shape your practice and keep your development plan updated. And I think if you can start getting into that reflective cycle there, you're going to identify quickly, you're going to be more specific with your practice, and you're going to make improvement faster. Okay?
Tak, naposledy já jako překladatel malý. Tak, začnu vnitřníma a vnějšíma tlakama. Nikdo, nebo respektive jeden turnaj, vás nedefinuje jako hráče. A váš výkon na hřišti vás nereflektuje jako člověka. Takže Harry zmiňoval, že neměňte drasticky vaši rutinu, nebo nezačnete dělat něco úplně nového těsně před startem nového turnaje, protože váš trénink by měl být založený na tom, jestli je to v sezóně, nebo jestli to je off-season, mimo sezónu, když se snažíte něco technicky něco upravit nebo změnit, protože byste potom neměli díky tomu čekat zázraky přes noc. Ale vždycky byste si měli po tom daném turnaji vyhodnotit realisticky tu situaci jako takovou, co nastalo, proč to nastalo, a měli byste se snažit to samozřejmě změnit a potenciálně zlepšit, abyste se posunuli k tomu lepšímu výsledku a výkonu jako takovému. Používejte Brysona k vyhodnocování vašich výkonů. Harry tam dával konkrétně teďka jako konkrétní příklad z Braslav. Ať už to byly 2 nebo 3 kola, tak ty 2 nebo 3 kola v tom Brysonu porovnávejte s těma vašima posledníma 10, nebo třeba například s minulou sezónou, abyste dokázali určit, kde potenciálně je to nejslabší a kde nejlepší. Takže si zkusit dávat potenciálně těžké otázky, k čemu se dostanu za chvilku. A hlavně zkuste to prodiskutovat, ať už s vaším osobním trenérem, nebo s trenéry v RTSku, v NTSku, kterým věříte a který vám dají dobrou zpětnou vazbu na ten váš výkon jako takovej. Jo, tu zdravou, ať už to bude zdravá konstruktivní kritika, anebo naopak pochvala za nějaký určitý segmenty vaší hry a zároveň naznačení, kde byste se mohli zlepšit. Harry vytáhnul z Brysona data nejmenovaného hráčky přímo ze Zbraslavy, který říkal, že byl naštvaný z toho, jak driveoval, jaká byla jeho hra v poli. Přičemž, když jste se viděli ty statistiky jako takové, tak měl skoro 80% trefených greenů v regulaci, přičemž z těch 80% bylo víc jak 2/3 nebo 2/3 bylo do 6 metrů od jamky, což bylo v těch daných podmínkách neuvěřitelný. Ale proměnil už jenom 25% z těch konkrétně to bylo nějakých 29 greenů regulaci do těch 6 metrů. Přičemž trefil 13 greenů regulaci na kolo, velmi dobrý, v těch podmínkách tak pořád skoro neuvěřitelný, ale proměnil, jak už zmiňoval jednou, nebo jak jsem já zmiňoval jednou, jenom 25% do těch 6 metrů a scrambling, krátká hra up and downy, měl jenom z 11 pokusů, měl jenom 3, zachránil jenom 3. Podívali jsme se potom, nebo Harry se podíval trošku hloubš do těch statistik a na té krátké hře bylo vidět, že 2krát přihrával ten hráč nebo hráčka z fairway, 2krát z rafu a 7krát z rafu kolem greenu. Přičemž Sverve měl 50% úspěšnosti a jednopatu nebo up and downu, z rafu 0 a z toho rafu kolem greenu měl z těch 7 pokusů 3. Pak jel ještě další statistiky, přičemž jakmile trefil green v regulaci, jak měl 2,1 patů, pat na jemku měl 1,96, když ten hráč minul green, tak měl 1,57 patů. Počet jednopatů, počet dvojpatů, počet trojpatů, procentuální šance na jednopad, dvojpat a trojpat. Šance na potenciální trojpat byla 17%, na jednopad 21%. Ten hráč jako takový zmínil, že mu nešlo drivování, nebo obecně dlouhá hra, přičemž ale ty výsledky, nebo ta statistika z toho Brysona říká úplně něco jiného. Je vidět, že krátká hra by mohla být potenciálně lepší a hlavně patování. A pak jsme u toho, proč to tak bylo. Harry jako trenér by se zeptal toho hráče, bylo to tím, že se ten hráč nezvykl na dané podmínky těch greenů, byly moc rychlé, byly moc pomalé, nebo tam byl problém v technice, nebo tam byl problém v tom startu toho míče, co se týče směru a tak dále a tak dále. Takže by šel podstatně hloubš. Najednou z té dlouhé hry jsme se dostali úplně někam jinam a takhle byste potenciálně vy mohli pracovat sami se sebou nebo se svým osobním trenérem nebo s trenérem u reprezentace, abyste si dokázali vyhodnocovat realisticky, co se stalo. Ty cíle jako takový, co tam ještě Harry zmínil v posledním slajdu, tak byste právě se měli snažit vytvořit diskuzi s někým, komu věříte, ať už trenéry nebo s rodiči, která bude založena na těchto číslech z toho Brysonu. Zároveň byste se měli potom podívat, kolik greenů jste trefili, kolik bylo do těch pozic, jaká byla úspěšnost proměnění těch patů a jaký byl scrambling, ta krátká hra, ty up and downy v průběhu těch 2-3 dnů, jo? Když si uděláte tu statistiku z toho posledního turnaje. Zároveň, co bylo dobré, abyste si sami vyhodnotili, nebo sami jste se dokázali odpovědět, co bylo dobré na vašem výkonu v tady těch specifických oblastech, co myslíte, že by se dalo nejlíp a nejrychleji zlepšit do toho dalšího turnaje a hlavně, co budete dělat k tomu, abyste zlepšili tady ty aspekty. Bude to něco technického, nebo to bude taktického, například course management, nebo ten decision making, to rozhodování a správné vyhodnocování, co budete hrát za hole, například když fouká. A pak, když si tady to vyhodnotíte, dokážete si odpovědět na tady ty otázky, tak abyste byli specifický v tom, že jaké drily budete dělat. Nějaké drily, které dokážou být, nebo které dokážete měřit. Třeba konkrétně na patování, že si dáte drily na tempo, na rychlost, na start toho míče. A kdo vás k tomu bude podporovat? Kdo vám to vymyslí třeba? Ať už to budete zase trenér osobní, nebo v regionu, nebo u repre UAčka a tak. A zároveň, když to tady to uděláte a vymyslíte, tak abyste pořád updateovali váš tréninkový deník. To si myslím, že je takhle zatím za mě všechno dnes. Harry, I just finished it.
Vojtou. Okay, guys. Well, thanks for holding on. I think that's gone on for slightly longer than I had anticipated, but appreciate you sticking with it. And I think finally, with that task, please just post something on Bryson, and whoever is working with you will communicate with you. And I think it's a really good way for us to communicate outside of tournaments through those stats and through those numbers, and to start those conversations. But from my perspective, guys, there was some really great stuff last week and over the last 3 weeks, really, in the training as well. And I think you need to be positive, keep working hard. I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes in the next couple of weeks and at the next event. And and just keep going. I think it's an exciting part of the season now. And I'm really looking forward to seeing as many of you as I can in a few weeks when I'm back over. Vojtou, thanks as always for excellent translation, and we'll see you guys soon.
Tak Harry jen poděkoval všem za to, jak se s touto situací dokážete poprat, jak trénujete. Přeje všem jen to nejlepší a těší se na všechny, až je zase uvidí, přičemž to bude za 3 týdny. To je pro dnešek všechno, mějte se hezký večer. Naschle.
Děkujeme, nashledanou.